If you want to write stories that stand out and compete in the professional world, then in this mini course, I'm going to hand you the exact step-by-step storytelling framework that I've used for more than 13 years in high-end television drama to help both brand new and experienced writers go from blank pages to finished novel drafts, commissioned TV scripts, greenlit series, and produced feature films. Now, you're probably here because that hasn't happened for you yet, and you're also probably throwing hours into your stories, whether that's imagining them or even getting words down on the page, but you're feeling a little bit directionless with those ideas not quite landing like you want. So in this video, you're going to learn how to build and develop nuanced and authentic, captivating characters that drive plots to emotional and impactful climaxes. And to do that, I'll walk you through the two most common types of story arcs, how to broadly map them across your novel or script, and how to make sure that they lead to a meaningful and engaging story experience for your reader or audience. If you want the resources that go with this course, then just click the link in the description below. And if this is the kind of content that you want more of, then please like and subscribe when you feel you're getting value so that this is pushed to more writers like you. Links to the full Pro Writer Blueprint course and other ways to work with me are also in the description below. And now let's dive in to the Arc Mastery Blueprint. So what's inside this course and what are we going to be covering? First of all, we're going to be unpacking what makes great stories resonate and why the stories we love have endured. Then we're going to be discovering the controlling idea at the heart of your story to give you that North Star that will ensure your projects have impact and keep you on track when you write. You'll learn how to develop authentic, evocative and captivating characters with our character alchemy process, and we'll integrate your character alchemy with our industry-proven story framework to craft bulletproof, powerful arcs with meaningful climactic transformations so you can launch stories in any medium you want in just hours instead of weeks, months, or years. And using this, you'll then establish a repeatable workflow so you can implement the process you're learning today anytime to craft professional story and character arcs in fiction, film, theatre, and TV. So now that we've just covered what the Arc Mastery Blueprint is going to impart and what you'll go through in this mini course, join me in the first lesson where I'm going to give you the vital framework, the lens through which you should view and approach all of your writing, your stories, plots, and characters. Welcome to the first main lesson where we're going to be setting the character and story foundations that you need to understand and integrate into your process if you want to effectively write stories at the professional level, stories that can compete in the industry and have a real chance of selling so you can finally achieve the vision and dream that you want. Albert Einstein once said that a problem defined is a problem already half solved. So if you want to write stories that compete in the professional world, stories that can actually sell, then first of all you need to bust through the three major misconceptions that keep most writers stuck, and those are believing that stories are all about either the character, the plot, or the events. But these are all wrong, and specifically events do not equal a story. So what does? Well, a story's DNA, if you think about it as the dual helix of a DNA strand, one of those two main strands is going to be your character, the other is going to be your plot. But what ties those things together, because they do need to interweave the whole time, that's going to be your events. Conflict and tension bridge the two things, glue the two things together through dynamic events that propel the story forward. And as the story progresses forward, those two strands need to be intertwining the whole time. Character informs plot, and plot must inform character. The two things cannot be conceived of apart. One cannot be more important than the other because they are wholly contingent on each other for effective story development. So what is a character? Well, we're going to be approaching it with the idea and understanding that characters are representatives of patterns of perception, thought, and action embodied in the world. And stories are humanity's original technology for revealing, reflecting, and facilitating the real-life process of change and transformation in our lives. Stories are the lens through which we filter existence, including ourselves. We're telling ourselves stories all the time. We tell stories to know the world better, to define it, so that in the process we get to discover and redefine ourselves. We hear a story, we see a story, or we watch a story, and perhaps we can relate to something the character's going through, or we wish to be able to relate to it, and we are therefore inspired to be more like the characters in those stories because they represent values, beliefs and actions, perceptions of thought and action that we want to have ourselves. Stories that resonate through generations are ones that reveal primal, essential, and eternal truths. Truths about existence, humanity's place in it, and experience of it, and how we might therefore transcend to transform the world. And in doing so, we get to transform ourselves. The true power of stories is that they allow us, as the reader, audience, or listener, to identify, understand, and then direct the course of our own evolution. So when we're talking about arcs, what is it that we actually mean in stories? And we're going to cover the main two today, which is the transformative arc, but also the flat arc. These are characters like James Bond, Jack Reacher, Indiana Jones. In flat arcs, the protagonist does not significantly change personally in the course of the narrative, but their presence changes the world and lives of the other people in that story world. The protagonist in a flat arc usually possesses high competency. They're really good at what they do, and they have intense conviction of their belief and their philosophy. Their traits are going to be baked in. Their conviction makes them highly motivated because they know what they believe in, they're clinging to that, and therefore that gives them the motivation to champion that belief and philosophy in the world. They're going to be very proactive. They are going to also be an avatar and champion of their particular philosophy, belief, and value set. And stories with flat arcs explore the effects which our beliefs, our goals, and actions can have on shaping the world and other people's lives. The focus in a flat arc is on external changes through action and catalyzing transformations in others and the world. Now, in transformative arcs, which we covered briefly if you did the Professional Character Creation Course 2, these are stories in which the protagonist himself is going to undergo a crucial transformation, as well as the story world and other people too. But they are the prime catalyst for the change that's explored in the story. In stories with a transformative arc, the protagonist is going to undergo significant personal, internal, and external transformation, changing their world in pursuit of their specific goals. Transformative arcs explore the effects that beliefs, goals, and actions have on shaping ourselves and our world. And it focuses on external events catalyzing internal, personal change to deliver both internal and external transformation in line with the story's core theme. And all of this will result in a permanent change for both the protagonist and their world too. So the first step in the arc mastery blueprint is to think about your story and your protagonist and define whether they have a flat or a transformative arc. What type of story are you wanting to tell? Is it one where James Bond or Jack Reacher is somebody who doesn't really change, but they are going to be motivated with a high level of conviction, their traits are baked in, and their presence driving the story is going to force changes in the story world? Or are they somebody who, as well as changing the story, is going to go through a deep personal transformation, and that transformation is vital to them winning success in the end? And to bring your characters to life and explore these arcs in detail, we need to jump into the expanded character alchemy process. Welcome to the character alchemy process. So, why do we call this character creation process character alchemy? Alchemy is an ancient pursuit that was focused on the transmutation, meaning the transformation of dull or imperfect ordinary ingredients into their highest or most perfect version. This divine science gripped the minds of Europe and the wider world from around the 12th century onward. The worldview of that time in Europe claimed that everything existed in a spiritual hierarchy. They called it a chain of being, which effectively was an ordering of perfection. With that governing belief, alchemists therefore sought to ascend base metals up the hierarchy. To their minds, it made sense that they should be able to ascend lead up that hierarchy of perfection to achieve the metal's most perfect version, which is of course gold. Of course, they failed, famously, and one of the reasons that they failed is they misunderstood the process that the alchemical tradition, which dated back to ancient Egypt, actually referred to. It was the real possibility of transforming not metals, not treasure, but ourselves. The secret of alchemy's divine science is the magical process through which we can become the conscious agents of our own transmutation, our transformation, from our own imperfect or base version into the brilliant gold of an enlightened, self-actualized and fully realized human being. Crucially, one who embodies and fulfills their true potential. As we discussed earlier, characters should be vessels who embody patterns of perception, thought, and action. Now that we've defined a character, what's a plot? Well, a plot is what's going to chart a particular type of story experience across the narrative. Now, there are many different types of plot archetypes, but each type of plot is going to come with specific challenges inherent to that plot's DNA. And a plot's events must be the sequential catalysts, the triggers for internal and external character growth. And that growth is what propels the character toward your story's climax. And it's the climax where your story's real meaning should be revealed in action through the choices and decisions and actions that your protagonist makes in the build-up and during the climax itself. Stories, therefore, explore how a character's package of perceptions, thought, and actions are tested and transformed by the specific experiences and trials that your plot's events throw their way. So to create authentic and nuanced characters, you need to excavate their emotional and psychological depths. Just like us, I approach this with the idea that characters have to have wants, needs, wounds, and beliefs. And these are stacked in layers and all interlinked. And to effectively create these elements, we have to define what your story's truly about. And we're going to do that in the first main step of the character alchemy process. So join me in the next lesson where we'll be doing just that. Welcome to the first main step of the character alchemy process, where we're going to be defining what your story's actually about at its core, and that's defining your story's core theme. As we covered earlier, stories are a way through which humans make sense of the world. Stories help us to do that by making difficult truths about existence fun to explore and digest. But being fun is not enough for a story to have a lasting impact. There needs to be a point to a story, to give it meaning, and doing that is your story's theme's job. A story's core theme is what it's really about. The theme is the underlying message or the big idea that's going to give your story depth. Without a theme, it might be entertaining, but your story will lack lasting impact or significance because the theme is literally the thing that gives the meaning to all of your story's events. Without that, it's going to be a hollow experience overall. So for your writing to resonate through decades, it's going to have to speak beyond the context and time of its writing. To do this, your writing must explore universal themes through your character and narrative arcs. Universal themes make stories timeless. Those are your immortality key. The story's theme is an encapsulation of the particular type of transformation that this story is going to explore, as well as the inherent challenges, values, and revelations that we should expect characters to face along the way relative to that theme overall. The protagonist, your main character, is therefore the means through which a particular transformation is being unpacked on the reader's and audience's behalf. And remember, the way it's going to do that is by establishing, first of all, go back to our character definition. A character is a vessel, a package of perceptions, thoughts, and actions. And if the theme is a particular type of transformation the story is going to explore, then it's going to be showing how those perceptions, thought, and actions are going to be tested in pursuit of achieving that thematic transformation. So this is all in pursuit of understanding, for us as the reader or audience, the effects that the character's beliefs, values, and actions have on their life, and through that we can understand the same, how those beliefs, values, and actions have an effect on our lives and in our world at large. In the feature film Sicario, the central theme is the moral ambiguity in the complexity of justice. In Inception, the central theme that the protagonist is going to explore is the theme of absolution, the protagonist's need to make peace with his guilt and loss. In the novel Dune, Frank Herbert, the author, said that the central idea, the thing that compelled him to write Dune, was mulling the danger of charismatic leaders, which he then explored through the lens of religious messiahs. And therefore, in the novel Dune, the protagonist, Paul Atreides, his journey is exploring the thematic peril of deification. Everything he goes through is to articulate that central theme. In A Game of Thrones, the first novel and the first TV series too, Ned Stark, as the protagonist, goes through a journey to thematically explore the peril of honor in a world of deceit. And as that's just book one of a larger series, the grand narrative theme that unites all of the books and series overall, everything that happens is filtering like tributaries into the main thematic river, which is the consequences and implications of seeking power. That's the umbrella theme that bridges everything in the Game of Thrones series. In True Detective Series 1, Marty Hart and Rust Cole are protagonists whose journeys thematically explore the price of truth. In Breaking Bad, Walter White's journey is exploring the corrupting nature of power and control. That's the central theme that bridges all of the series. In James Bond, the feature film Skyfall, it's the cost of duty and the burden of loyalty. So how do you bring your theme to life? How do you figure out what it is and how does it relate to your character? Remember, the primary rule, the easiest way to figure out what that core theme really is to ask myself, what is it my protagonist does in the climax? How do their actions and decisions in the climax reveal this theme in action? And if it isn't, you need to make it do so, and then you can back engineer them up to that point. But if it's not happening in the climax, your theme is probably not clear enough and it's not coming through enough for the readers and audiences to understand what has been the point of everything I've just gone through. Why have I invested in this person? Why is achieving this goal actually relevant or meaningful? There has to be some central theme that gives meaning to those events, to their choices and actions. With transformative arcs, your protagonist's personal revelation, a revelation they have about the beliefs and behaviors they've clung to throughout your story and what needs to change about those, is going to be the thing that gives them the revelation about how they need to act in the climax to succeed. It's going to drive their climactic actions, and those actions will reflect, reveal, and or directly embody your core theme in action as that character revelation catalyzes their personal transformation by the climax too. With a flat arc, a story in which the protagonist does not personally undergo that significant change, but will catalyze change in the world and the lives of others, they are typically going to be acting as a moral and or philosophical anchor, a champion for a particular value set, a belief set, and it's going to be showing them in conflict with their opposition, which is going to highlight the impact of championing those beliefs and philosophical points of view. And in doing so, them championing that, it's going to be how you bring that theme to life, by showing its success over rival philosophies. And in this way, stories with a flat arc primarily showcase a battle of beliefs, perspectives, ideals, or values in the climactic action instead. And you can see this in Batman in The Dark Knight against the Joker. Welcome to the next step in the character alchemy process. Here we're going to be crafting your protagonist's want. This is what they're going to be pursuing, what they want throughout your story. So, a protagonist's want is what they are going to be actively seeking right from your story's start. And it's going to be the thing that they know that they want to achieve by the story's end. Now, you might have experienced or encountered the idea of a want versus a need in other writing courses you've done before, but the way that I approach it, which I haven't seen done anywhere else, is that the want is actually comprised of two parts. It's going to be an internal desire that they have, which is going to be pursued through specific external goals. They are typically going to be pursuing their want in the understanding that it will make them truly happy and give them a lasting outcome that they seek. It's going to be their main plot objective, and as your plot-driven necessity, it has to color how a character approaches their other goals. So if they're going to have side quests, there are going to be other things that they do in your chapters or scenes across your novel or screenplay. We need to understand why they're doing that. And the way we'll understand why they're doing that, so it doesn't feel like a diversion that's not what we signed up to read or see, is you're going to have to establish that internal desire first. And therefore, we understand that the character's doing this because they see it as a vital puzzle piece and building toward that big picture overall. Their want must be visible because it's going to be their external goal, and as a result of that, it's going to be what drives their external growth, the changes in their external world that will be achieved by the end of your story. In screenwriting, their external actions, what they do, what they say, is going to be your only method for revealing their character to us and displaying their internal growth. Now, if you're writing prose, you're writing a novel, of course you have license to jump into their head and heart and tell us what they're thinking, but not the same in writing for the screen. Either way, show don't tell is a great rule to hold to, and what your character wants has to be interesting for your reader and audience to watch the protagonist obtain. It is the primary thing that we, as your reader or audience, are investing in the story you're offering us to see achieved. Now, your character's want consists of those two parts that I mentioned earlier. The first is that internal desire. Your character's internal desire is the aspiration, objective, or ambition that motivates them at a deeper fundamental level. It's going to reflect a consistent, overarching goal or aspiration that has to drive and inform all their actions and decisions throughout the story. They know that they are striving to achieve this internal desire on both an emotional and a psychological level, even if it's not something explicitly stated. So even if you don't have the character say, I desire this thing, I want this thing, we need, as your reader and audience, need to see evidence of them trying to do things, actions in the world, through which, in seeing them attempt to do this, we can infer and understand that they desire a certain outcome, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. So, as we'll come to a bit later in Breaking Bad, in the first episode, the start of the first episode of Breaking Bad, we see Walter White working multiple jobs. And the job that does for us as the audience is it establishes that Walter's internal desire is to be a provider. And we don't need him to say that. It's evident through what we see him do. Now, your character's commitment to achieving their internal desire is what's going to justify them doing everything they do and enduring what your story throws their way. And what's going to be thrown their way? Well, it's got to be specific external goals. These are the concrete, tangible objectives your protagonist actively pursues in the external world through which that internal desire is expressed or inferred. Your narrative's central plot has to be crystallized in a single plot-specific external goal that the character sets out to achieve through external action in the hope that achieving it will fulfill their internal desire. Now, when you conceive of your characters, this is what normally takes writers off track. You have a plethora, a whole range of things that you know, as somebody who's thought about this character a lot, justifiably wants to achieve. You know the facets of their character. But when you try to realize all of that on the page, all it actually does is it confuses your reader or audience about the specific thing we are supposed to be investing in them achieving. And therefore, if you can identify a single main internal desire, this is the one thing that they are burning to have fulfilled, then we know what we're investing in, and we know that they are going to be pursuing that. Whether you tell us or not, we can infer that they're going to be pursuing all they go through to achieve the fulfillment of that desire. And your plot-specific external goal is actually going to be presenting them with a route, indirectly or directly, to having that internal desire fulfilled. And that's why they're going to sign up to go through the hardship that the story throws their way. If we look at the feature film Sicario, Kate Mesa, the protagonist, has an internal desire for justice and moral clarity, and the plot-specific external goal that she's going to be engaged with in pursuit of that desire is dismantling a Mexican drug cartel. In the novel Dune, the protagonist is Paul Atreides, and Paul's internal desire is to define his place in the world and understand his identity, which is being informed and corrupted by intrusive dreams which are giving him some kind of prophetic idea that what lies ahead in his plot-specific goal is going to be important to him fulfilling that desire. And what is the plot-specific external goal? Well, it's helping his family survive the transition on Arrakis. In A Game of Thrones, the first novel and the first series in which Ned Stark is the protagonist of the story, Ned's internal desire is to protect his family and maintain peace and justice in the realm. And it's made clear to him through his plot-specific external goal that the way he has to now do that is to uncover the truth behind the death of Jon Arryn if he can protect his family and maintain peace and justice. In the first series of True Detective, Rust Cohle, one of the two protagonists, has the internal desire of understanding a chaotic and uncontrollable world. And we can infer that because we see him take meticulous notes in his black ledger, a way of ordering the chaos around him as he seeks answers and control of that chaos. And the way he's going to fulfill that internal desire is through solving the bizarre murder of Dora Lang. In Breaking Bad, Walter White's internal desire is to be a provider for his family and validate his life as worthwhile. And the specific external goal central to the plot that gives him a route to doing that is cooking and selling meth to get rich fast. In James Bond, the movie Skyfall, James has the internal desire to remain relevant and protect MI6 and M, validating his purpose and loyalty while guarding the family that he has. And the reason that this is important to him, the family aspect, will become clear as we go through the character alchemy process later on and drill in to James Bond's psychology. But in order to fulfill that internal desire of protecting M and MI6, he has to defeat Silver, his plot-specific external goal, who represents a threat to MI6 and M, and in doing so, Bond can ensure MI6's survival. So now it's time to explore your protagonist's want, the thing that's going to drive their external arc through the events of your story. So initially we need to understand what is that burning desire they have, the thing that's going to justify their actions and decisions through all your story throws their way. So what's the thing they deeply crave and attempt to obtain or fulfill throughout the story? How do their choices, decisions, and actions show the reader or audience what emotionally matters to them, even if the character is initially unaware of it themselves? What is their plot-specific external goal, your plot's main external objective that the character pursues in the story, which we should be able to justifiably understand this character doing because of the way you've established their internal desire? Work through these questions and then join me in the next step of character alchemy. Welcome to the next step where we're going to now give your character the vital element for you to drive their internal emotional arc that's going to connect to your story's core theme. This is your character's need, and a character's need is their deeper, unconscious requirement for their emotional and or psychological growth and ultimately their true fulfillment. Your character's want is usually what they think will make them fulfilled when they achieve it, but their need is what will truly make them happy and deliver that lasting fulfillment. Unlike the specific external objective of a want, a need is an internal, essential, often subconscious, but universal requirement without which they would be a broken person. Their need is something to which we, your reader and audience, should be able to relate, and for that reason, it typically links directly to your story's core theme, because remember, that's what gives your story meaning, and your character is a vessel, a vehicle for exploring how we can access that meaning by challenging their perceptions, thoughts, and actions. So this need is that internal element that they're going to need to realize, and in realizing and embodying, you're going to show your theme in action. So in protagonists with transformative arcs, the need is typically going to represent or embody what they need to learn, to accept, and change about themselves in order to earn the fulfillment they're seeking. The need often represents the values and beliefs they must embody and actively champion by the end to turn their life around. This internal need is going to be linked to an emotional wound, but before we dive into what the wound does, we should also discuss stories with flat arcs, because if you're writing one, then the protagonist's need isn't actually going to be about a personal transformation, but rather it's about the need to affirm the truth of the beliefs that they already hold dear. Remember, in a flat arc, the character like James Bond or Indiana Jones, they already have strong beliefs, they have strong convictions about those beliefs, and they're going to be championing them. So their need is the need to affirm the truth of all they hold dear. Their need reflects a deeper necessity for their worldview or philosophy to be proven correct through their victory, its victory, over their opposition, who usually threaten or challenge the validity of that protagonist's belief set while embodying an opposing philosophical point of view. In flat arcs, if the protagonist's belief is disproven, the paradigm through which they see themselves and the world, it's going to risk causing their entire sense of self and guiding principles to collapse. So if we look at the examples again that we've covered so far, in Sicario, Kate Mesa, her need is to reconcile her own idealism with the realities of morally grey operations and the decisions that uphold the status quo that Kate has believed to be good. Remember that the theme is the moral ambiguity in the complexity of justice, and that's why her need is relating directly to that theme by showing her that actually the black and white world that she thinks exists, that she holds to be good, is not true, and she's going to have to be brought into that morally grey zone to access that theme on our behalf. In the feature film Inception, Dom Cobb, the protagonist, remember the theme is absolution, his need to make peace with his guilt and loss, so of course that's his character's need. He needs to be able to do that, to be able to let go of Mal and his past in the climax, the actions and decisions he makes to reveal that theme in action and earn success in the end. In the novel Dune, Paul's need is to accept that he cannot remain independent while also fulfilling other people's expectations, and that leadership and power is going to come with the loss of personal control. In A Game of Thrones, Novel 1 and Series 1, with the protagonist being Ned Stark, remember that the first series, which Ned explores on the reader and audience's behalf, is the peril of honor in a world of deceit. And because Ned's story is a tragedy, he's not going to be able to integrate what his need represents by the end. And that need that he has and that he rejects is to accept that his ideals of honor and justice cannot survive in a world of backstabbing ambition. But because he refuses to accept that, he meets a tragic end. In True Detective, Rust Cohle's need is to confront his personal demons in order to update his initial belief in the absence of meaning with a more hopeful perspective on life and his personal agency. In Breaking Bad, Walter White, whose journey explores the corrupting nature of power and control, remember, he is somebody who has no control at the beginning of the story, and so he needs to find the courage to take control of his life if he is to become a man who can be a provider and fulfill his internal desire. In James Bond, in Skyfall, James's need is to champion as someone with a flat arc and validate his belief in duty and loyalty, and that MI6 is inherently good. So now it's time to identify your protagonist's need and how it explores and articulates your story's core theme. So what universal value or principle linked to your story's theme does their need represent or embody? With that in mind, what will they realize that they need to accept and learn to be and or do to ultimately win in your story? What value, beliefs, behaviors, or ideals do they need to champion to prevail? In what ways does integrating that need allow the character to act differently from the beginning to the end and reveal your story's core theme through their choices? If you're writing a story with a transformative arc, are they able to accept and integrate their need and therefore earn victory? Or do they reject the values and lessons that their need demands of them, leading to a tragic end like Macbeth or Walter White? If you're writing a story with a flat arc, what needs to be satisfied for your protagonist to feel complete and destabilizes them if taken away? How do their climactic actions reinforce a belief they champion and need to prove true? Welcome to the next step of the character alchemy process, where we're now going to be diving into your character's heart and mind to identify and create your protagonist's wound. So we mentioned the wound earlier as relating to the need, but what is it specifically? Your character's wound is an emotional, often deep-seated pain or trauma that will generally have occurred before we meet your character in the story. It's going to be something that heavily influences their motivations, fears, and crucially, their belief, which we're coming to next. Since the wound is an internal element of the character, we can't access it, certainly not if you're writing for the screen. If you're writing prose, you can articulate through their thoughts what it is that haunts them, but if you're writing for the screen, we certainly can't see that. And for that reason, for the show don't tell mantra, a character's flaw is something that I approach as the visible manifestation of that wound's internal effects and the governing belief that it creates. So your character's wound is the thing that haunts them or keeps them up at night, but as an internal element that they're ignoring, denying perhaps, they are not going to be articulating this to everybody, but it's going to be having an effect on them, just like us in real life. The package of poisonous thoughts that we might hold, any of the things that hold us back internally, they manifest through, maybe we have snappy arguments, maybe whatever it is. These things are going to be manifesting somehow, and that's your character's flaws. So you've got to identify what is this thing inside them, this character wound, and then figure out, well, what are the visible manifestations through which that wound makes itself known through my character's behaviors. Through those visible external flaws, we, your reader and audience, should be able to sense their inner turmoil, and maybe the characters in your story can sense this character's inner turmoil too, because they have to experience those flaws in the story world. So I want you to think about the flaw, and maybe you have more than one for your character, as an unconscious or uncontrollable behavioral glitch emerging from their wound's corrupted internal code. So think about it like a computer screen. So they have a flaw, something they don't have the power to fix early in your story because they're avoiding facing the pain of their wound, and they can deny or ignore this wound's broken code, but they can't stop the computer screen from glitching, and that's their flaw, the thing that everybody else can see. And through seeing that, we can understand that something is going on inside. So if we look at Inception, the protagonist, Dom Cobb, his character wound that haunts him from before we join him in the story is the loss of his wife, Mal, and his guilt about the manner of her death. In Dune, Paul Atreides' wound is being burdened by familial expectations and forces that he doesn't understand. In Game of Thrones, Ned Stark's wound is the unjust circumstances around the death of his sister and the burden of his duty. Rust Cole's wound in True Detective is the death of his daughter. Breaking Bad, Walter White's wound is living with years of professional failures after having had past successes, which has resulted in his lack of present validation and sense of no self-worth. When we're talking about the wound, if you're writing a story with a flat arc, instead of it being something the protagonist, the character, has to personally overcome to heal, the wound instead typically is going to act as a source of pain that continues to reinforce the protagonist's belief. The wound can therefore be that fuel that they pour on their convictions, making their need to validate their paradigm even stronger. Their adherence to their beliefs might be also a way of them coping with or making sense of their wound. But again, if the belief is going to be proven false, if that paradigm that they hold to is proven false, actually it's going to risk reopening that wound or stripping away their coping mechanism. So we can look at Bruce Wayne in Batman as an example of the relationship between these things. His wound, famously, the trauma of his parents' murder and his sense of failure to intervene, which has given him a belief that people are good and need protecting from bad individuals, and that has informed his need to fight villains and sacrifice himself on others' behalf to prove his belief true, justify his survivor guilt, and cope with his trauma through achieving success in the external world against these villains. In James Bond, again, another character with a flat arc who needs to validate his paradigm through action. His wound is his past as an orphan, which we learn in Skyfall left him emotionally detached and defined by duty. So his relationship with M, the person he's striving to protect, we understand that based on his wound because M is a surrogate for the parental connection he lost. So now explore your protagonist's wound. What moment or experience left them emotionally scarred or ashamed? If that's not appropriate for your story, ask what is the thing that keeps them up at night? How does that connect to their internal desire, which they think achieving will cure the pain of this wound? How does this wound subtly or overtly control their belief, their behavior, and their choices in the story? And is this wound something that also affects other relationships they have in your story too? Who or what reminds them of this wound in the story? When does that happen? And how does this character react? And what visible external flaws can clearly communicate or hint at their internal wound? So answer these and then join me in the next step. Welcome to the next step, where we're going to now be diving into your protagonist's mental world, unpacking their belief. So what do I mean when I reference the belief? The belief that your character holds is going to be dictating their behavior in the story, just like us. How a character sees the world is directly informed by their beliefs. So their initial belief at the start of your story should often be the result of them having learned or embodied the wrong lessons from that historic wound that you've just established. So whatever that wound is, the effect was so strong, so powerful, that it has shaken them and corrupted how they view themselves and the world, usually for the worst. Usually there's some detrimental effect because the belief has got to be challenged through the course of the story, or if it's a flat arc, championed, but the wound always plays a role in its creation. So this false or limiting wound-informed belief is going to be challenged in the course of your story and can only be corrected in transformative arcs if they successfully integrate their need. Because again, if they refuse to accept what must change about them, they will typically meet that tragic end. So a character's belief, the paradigm that they hold about themselves and their place in the world, is going to also link to and inform their philosophical point of view. And that's going to connect to your theme. But before we jump into the philosophical viewpoint and how it's different to the belief, first, let's establish what is this paradigm that your character holds. Remember, characters are a vessel, a package of perception, thought, and action. And now we're talking about what are the thoughts they have, because how do those thoughts drive their actions? You need to know the relationship between the two. In Inception, we can see that Dom Cobb's belief is that he is responsible for his wife's death. And he also believes that his reality is baseline true reality, which is in contrast to Mal's insistence that it is still just a dream. And it is the relationship between Mal's insistence that his belief was false and him trying to rectify that, which led to him creating the circumstances that gave rise to his wound. And now that wound continues to affect what he believes. In Dune, Paul Atreides has the initial belief that he can navigate the external forces he doesn't understand and control his identity while both remaining loyal to his family and the roles others want him to fulfill. And this is going to be proved false and corrected through the course of the story. In A Game of Thrones, of course, Ned holds to the belief of honor, honesty, and straightforward justice. In True Detective, Rust Cole holds the belief at the beginning that the world is chaotic and uncontrollable, and our actions are ultimately pointless. In Breaking Bad, Walter White initially believes that he is a moral person, but somebody who is weak and powerless with no control of his life, which is why Walter's need is control and power. And that's all in service of exploring the theme, the corrupting nature of power and control. These things you're now seeing all plugged together like puzzle pieces. In Skyfall, James Bond's belief is that duty and loyalty are paramount, and that is the thing that, as someone with a flat arc, he never sways from and champions throughout the story. So now it's time to define your protagonist's belief set, the paradigm through which they view and act in the world. How does your protagonist's belief govern their perception of themselves and their place in the world from the start? Who and what will challenge that belief in the course of your story? If you're writing a flat arc, ask how does this belief connect the ideas, values, and ideals that they need to prove true and will champion throughout. In a transformative arc, what false or limiting beliefs about themselves or the world have emerged from their wound? And how does their need provide the antidote to cure their false, wound-informed beliefs and ultimately inform their understanding of how to change their beliefs and behavior to complete their internal arc? When you've completed these questions, I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome to the next step, where we're now going to be diving into how you can assign philosophical viewpoints to your characters so that their decisions and actions throughout your story show an active debate in conflict, articulating your theme in action. So when we talk about the philosophical point of view in your character, it's encapsulating and expressing what the character believes about the world and their place in it, but now, rather than just themselves and the world, it's got to relate specifically to the theme. Like I just said, they are vessels inhabiting one or other points of a debate, and that debate is ultimately all about the thematic core of your story. We're just showing that happening in action through what these characters believe and how they act. So, as an example, we can look at Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, or Peter Parker's initial belief, is a personal belief that he can behave like a normal teenage boy. And that personal belief about how he shows up in the world is something that enables his denial of responsibility. Since Spider-Man's the story's central theme is famously, with great power comes great responsibility, his journey is about learning the cost of ignoring his responsibility. This cost is always made clear to him through his antagonist's actions, which always display a greater disregard of the consequences of wielding their own power. Facing that to gain victory over them, Spider-Man Peter Parker must update his personal belief, accepting he's not just a normal boy, and therefore his philosophical point of view updates too, and he becomes a champion of the philosophy, the team that philosophically represent taking responsibility for power. In doing so, he puts that philosophical point of view into conflict with his enemy's rival beliefs and philosophical points of view about disregarding the consequences of their own power in service to themselves. So with these philosophical points of view in conflict, the story's theme gets to be explored in a way we as the readers and audiences can easily understand because we see it happening in visible action. We hear and see what characters believe and do, and then the theme is brought to life for us simply. So the means through which your story challenges your characters' initial beliefs and philosophical points of view is going to be one of the simplest methods you'll find for exploring your story's philosophical heart and therefore exploring its core theme in action. An example to understand both the relationship but also the difference between that personal belief and that broader philosophical point of view relating to your theme is by using Star Wars, because it's very black and white. So in Star Wars, both the Jedi, the good team, let's say, and the Sith, the bad guys, share a belief in the mystical nature of the universe, the Force. They personally believe that. That's the paradigm through which they exist, and that personal belief drives their actions. But though they share that belief, they occupy rival philosophical points of view about how the Force should be viewed and used in pursuit of either liberation for the good guys or control for the bad. And that's because liberty versus control is the central theme of the Star Wars universe. So having these two teams, these two character sets, occupying those rival philosophical points of view about how they champion that belief in the world, we get to see liberty versus control as a theme championed throughout every story in the Star Wars universe. So to create captivating emotional story and character arcs, you must correctly assemble the key internal character elements that will also allow you to externally reveal their growth through visible conflict. And that growth must ultimately be in service to the theme at the core of their arc, and therefore, if they're the protagonist, the core of the story. And the battle between characters' philosophical viewpoints helps to put your theme into visible action. Philosophical conflict will explore your story's theme in a dynamic way by making the narrative resonate deeper than just plot or emotion can achieve on its own. So to create that philosophical conflict, you should try to establish rival beliefs and philosophical viewpoints in your key characters. And this is usually an important distinction in your protagonist and their antagonistic force, whoever or whatever that is, because that conflict is going to drive your story. And of course, the philosophical differences can be as nuanced as you like, depending on the story you're telling. If we look at Sicario as a prime example of this, the feature film, remember, the central theme is the moral ambiguity in the complexity of justice, and we therefore have Kate, who believes, as our protagonist, in black and white justice. It's either good or it's bad, there is no moral grey. And she is therefore put against an antagonist, Matt, whose rival philosophical point of view and belief is that the ends justify the means. He literally lives in the moral grey world that Kate, our protagonist, refuses to acknowledge or engage with. Matt's insistence on dragging Kate into the moral grey is the engine driving the movie's conflict and drama, and why it packs a punch beyond just the twists of its plot. We get to experience Kate having to confront the reality of her personal beliefs with what they're facing in the real world, and that shows philosophical conflict in action as the movie drives home its theme through that. So now I want you to identify and assign your philosophical points of view to the characters in your story, specifically your protagonist. What central moral or thematic debate is this character unconsciously participating in? How is your protagonist an avatar of one side of this thematic debate? And who or what is going to be representing the opposing sides? How does the tension between these philosophical viewpoints escalate as the story progresses, particularly in their confrontations and choices? And what action, choice, or event proves which philosophical stance wins in the end, and therefore reveals your story's theme in doing so as you present your conclusion about that thematic debate yourself? Now that we've gone through the character alchemy process in individual lessons and steps where you've actually been working between them, it's going to be useful for us to join up everything we've done in a single flow so you understand the character creation process and how each of those elements act like those puzzle pieces to interlock with each of the next steps and give you that full process of creation overall. So a character's want is the main super objective that they have, and their desire. So it's got to be that plot-specific external goal which they pursue to fulfill an internal desire. The character's commitment to achieving the external goal should showcase their dedication to achieving that internal desire, and their want should be something we're aware they are pursuing, which is also interesting for us to invest in seeing them obtain. We can summarize the want by saying they pursue their external goals in order to fulfill their internal desire. In transformative arcs, they typically won't be able to get what they want until they integrate their need and the deeper truths about their own behaviors and values that it represents. Their need is going to be the requirement for true fulfillment, and it links directly to your story's core theme to drive their internal arc. It has to therefore be integrated in the course of the story by facing and overcoming the effects of their emotional and psychological wound. And this is going to require them shedding that original wound-informed belief set and the behaviors that it gave rise to, which ultimately must be changed before the end for them to earn their main external goal and achieve internal fulfillment in doing so too. But this is not going to be possible for most of your story and the character's journey, because for most of that story, facing the pain of their wound is simply too much for them to bear. But until they can do so, the wound acts like a padlock around their need and keeps that truth that it represents inaccessible to them. Now, in both flat and transformative arcs, their wound is going to be influencing how they view the world and how they show up in life. It prevents them from facing the hard truths they must reconcile to unlock what they need to transform and succeed. So the wound has come to govern their core beliefs when we first meet them, which in turn, that personal belief set, is going to inform their initial philosophical point of view. That philosophical point of view must ultimately come into conflict with other characters' philosophies and personal belief sets too. Specifically, the philosophy and belief set usually will rival the protagonist's antagonist. So whatever beliefs and philosophies that your protagonist holds to, generally you want that in conflict with their antagonist. The process of your protagonist struggling to obtain their external want, the goal they are seeking because of that internal desire. The process of struggling to achieve that is going to be exposing them to their internal shortcomings. And eventually they're going to arrive at a point where ignoring this wound's effects on their life and behavior is no longer an option, because it remains the only thing consistent in their world and personality that they have not yet, at this point in the story, tried to engage with, accept, overcome, or change. And exactly when this needs to happen is going to be unpacked for you shortly in the dramatic order process, the heart of this course. By facing the limiting false beliefs and truths that their wound embodies, they can overcome it and heal themselves. And in doing so, they gain the clarity and understanding of what they truly need to do externally to succeed, and gain that lasting internal fulfillment in doing so. The character will now finally be able to transcend their original version, the limited version they began as they've transformed into a new person who is now capable of winning the goal and desire which had actually been incompatible with the person they were at the story's start. They held beliefs at the start of the story. Those beliefs dictated their perceptions, thoughts, and actions, which basically made them into a person who was not somebody naturally aligned with the type of result they want. But they've now undergone enough challenges to change those so that they are now naturally aligned with the life that they seek. So they have embodied that new belief and philosophy as they've internally and externally evolved. So they've transformed permanently, whether for good or for bad. In the character alchemy process, you first want to create your character's want, the internal desire, and the plot-specific external goal, their need, which must relate to the theme, their wound, the thing that haunts them and keeps them up at night based on an emotional or psychological event that usually happens before the story began, their belief, what they believe about themselves and their place in the world, informed by that historic wound, and their philosophical point of view, the thing that they either hold to throughout the story or will come to adopt and set into conflict with the antagonistic force they must overcome. You then want to crystallize rival beliefs and philosophical points of view in your characters, particularly the protagonist and antagonistic force. Remember that in standard transformative arcs, your protagonist's need directly links to your story's core theme, usually representing the beliefs and values they will need to embody to transcend, to overcome those initial limitations that you established in them at your story's start. So identify your protagonist's actions and decisions in the climax to help expose your core theme if it's not apparent to you already. And when you've done this, join me in the next part of this course, the Arc Mastery Blueprint, where I give you the framework that's going to help you bring all of this to life at particular points in your story to give you an outline that you can rely on and bring watertight stories to life. Welcome to Mastering Dramatic Order, and in this I'm going to be imparting and showing you a simple 8-step framework that you can use to outline stories in any medium you want, and it's going to use the character alchemy process, the work that you've just done in identifying those vital character elements, and show you where to plug them in a story's progress through 8 simple phases that will allow you, in combination with character alchemy, to now bring stories to life faster and easier than you've managed before. So what is dramatic order? Every story and every character arc is built using 8 sequential phases in a sequence, regardless of that story's length, format, or medium. Doesn't matter whether you're writing a novel or you're writing for the screen, whether it's for theatre or for radio. Every story and every arc has these same 8 phases in the same order. That is what I call dramatic order. And here is the dramatic order template that you can use to reliably bring stories to life and outline them, because all of the scenes and chapters you're imagining will slot into one of these 8 phases to help you order and arrange your story's events and plan those powerful arcs. So the first phase is the character's initial state of being. Here, your character is living their daily life, and that life, as we've covered, is going to be governed by their wound-informed beliefs, their philosophical point of view, and the core behaviors that you are establishing at your story's start. Here, we want to be seeing and understanding this character's internal desire through what they're trying to achieve in their personal world. And we're going to be seeing their flaws so that we can understand that wound, and you'll either articulate or show us basically a few things about what they believe so that we know who they are before the story gets underway and starts to strain and test that. The next phase is the introduction of their want, their main plot-specific external goal. So we know that they desire something in their personal life, that they are unfulfilled. We've established that in phase 1 in their state of being, and now something is introduced, a route to achieving that internal desire through your plot's specific external goal. So the characters living their daily life and they want something in the external world, and now the route's presented, so they commit to getting it, hoping that achieving it will fulfill that internal desire and answer their woes, the pain of their wound. And in answering that call to action, in pursuit of that want, the specific external goal central to your plot to fulfill that internal desire, they are going to leave the comfort zone of phases 1 and 2 and step into the unfamiliar situation phase of the story, where they're going to encounter resistance and usually encounter the main antagonist they're up against too. And this encounter with their antagonist very often also challenges them with that internal need you've identified, the thing relating to the theme. However, because your protagonist isn't obviously aware, firstly, that they're in a story at all, but also not able to accept the wound's control of their life, they also have no way of overcoming their own internal limitations to recognize that the thing they need to do in this encounter with the antagonist, first of all, is what they need to do to ultimately prevail too, right? So they don't know they have this need because they're not able to face their wound to learn that truth, and therefore they're typically overpowered here and can't take the actions to integrate that need and win. But that's okay, because winning is not the point of this phase of any story. Facing them with unfamiliar situations to shake those initial beliefs, the things they've taken for granted, is. That's the point of this. And vitally, coming into contact, encountering the things they are now up against in your story in this phase, the unfamiliar situation involves unfamiliar and new threats. They now at least know how to move into phase 4, which is adapting to the unfamiliar situation, the world, the unfamiliar world of your story that they now find themselves in pursuit of the plot's specific external goal. So they were in a state of being where we established who they are, what they want, what they believe, and what keeps them up at night. They were then presented with a specific goal central to your plot, and they've set out to achieve that, and that has brought them into an unfamiliar situation, an unfamiliar world, the heart of your story, where they're encountering new things and the things they're up against, whether that's things or people or characters or whatever. And in encountering those, they're now thinking, okay, oh God, I was not prepared for this. I need to figure things out fast. And that moves them into phase 4. And 4 is how they adapt to this new situation they find themselves in. So they've encountered unfamiliar things, and now they're figuring out how to adapt. They start making some plans, but they're going to be adapting to this new situation, specifically in transformative arcs, without updating their internal world. They are fully in the external. They're taking external actions, but they're not yet ready to say, there's stuff inside me, things I hold to be true, that I need to abandon here, because that's simply too much work, it's too much pain, just like in real life. This is why marketing is a thing. We're all seeking external solutions for things that often lie inside us, but we want the easy fix, so we go, I'll do this thing out there because it's easier than doing the hard internal work. Your characters have to be exactly the same, right? So they are going to be adapting to their new situation without updating their viewpoint or belief. They still believe at this point that success is possible without them having to undergo any of that difficult or significant personal change. So they're now adapting. They've encountered what they're up against. They've figured out, crikey, I'm in a new world here. This is all unfamiliar. How do I adapt? They're starting to adapt and make those adaptations. And in making those adaptations, in formulating plans, now they're getting proactive. So they've been more reactive up to this point. Now they're getting proactive. And therefore, they move into phase 5. Cross the middle of your story. See how this is ordered like a circle? Split it into quarters. You've got quarters of a story. Loosely, but it works for simple outlining. So now we're moving into them getting things. They're making progress because they know what they're up against, right? They've made those initial adaptations. So now they can start making some progress. They can start getting some wins on the route to getting their want, that specific goal they're seeking, because they know it's going to fulfill their desire. And through all of this, we have stayed invested in them because you made sure in phase 1 that we were clear on what they internally desire. So no matter what they've gone through, as long as that's consistent and we can justify it because, hey, I understand why they're doing this, because in some way they believe it's vital to achieving the goal that fulfills their internal desire, then whatever they're doing in this getting want phase of your story, we can understand and invest in. So In the transformative arc, they're going to be investing in those minor goals, those specific external goals, because they know that it's necessary steps to achieving that main goal overall. And they start getting those wins, and maybe they even obtain a large part or the thing that they think they wanted. But, and this is crucial, now they pay a price. For any win in any dramatic writing, there has to be a cost. This is the tension between scenes. It's the connective tissue that bridges them. Any high needs to be followed by a low, and that's how you keep the energy oscillating throughout so it never flatlines and gets dull. So, your character has made progress, and for that progress they must pay a price. The wins so far come at a heavy cost, and it is the pain of this price they now pay that is going to catalyze their understanding that what they wanted isn't necessarily what they need. In transformative arcs, this is where they're going to face their personal wound to finally accept the impact of their behavior and their beliefs, realizing that those must now change. So they have held on to this wound-informed belief since the start, since phase one, the state of being we found them in at the beginning of the story. They've made all this progress in the world of your story, the external world, in pursuit of that goal, but they haven't yet done any of that internal work because they've ignored having to do so. And now that they have encountered all of that coming apart, they're paying a heavy price, they now have to accept, okay, well, just doing external things is not going to move me far enough toward the goal now, because clearly there's other things I hadn't considered. What are those other things? Oh yeah, they're the beliefs and behaviors I cling to, and those are emergent properties from the wound. So I now have to face the wound. And usually the reason they have to face the wound is because the pain of this loss that you're going to give them is so great or so destructive to what they want in this story that actually facing the pain of the wound now is comparatively low. Before it seemed massive, but now this massive thing has just happened, it's just super painful to them. Now they realize they have no choice, and compared to what's just gone on, they can deal with it. This is Aunt May dying in Spider-Man just before the climax, and Peter then goes, I'll have to take responsibility for my power, does so, enters the climactic showdown, and you're going to do the same. So when they've entered the paying a price phase in a transformative arc, it's going to be the thing they realize in paying this heavy price they need to change about themselves to put that theme into action in the climax, and how they do that is embodying what the need represents. And firstly, to get there, they've got to shed the wound and all the beliefs and behaviors that it has led to. In confronting that wound, to shed those beliefs and behaviors that it gave rise to, they are able to understand what they need to do, and usually that's embodying new beliefs, values, and championing those in action. And then they step into the climactic event or sequence, the climax of your story, where they're going to roll the dice. They haven't done this before, but they're putting it all on the line. Now, if you're writing a story with a flat arc, it's pretty much the same. Dramatic order, whether it's for the person's transformation, the character's personal transformation, or not, doesn't matter. The story itself is going to go through this same dramatic order. These 8 phases are driving the story's arc regardless. In a flat arc, of course, the character isn't changing themselves, but they're still catalyzing this same 8-step process of change in the story world and lives of others. So if the paying a price phase for a transformative arc means the character personally has to interrogate their wound to understand their need and champion that in the climax, paying a price is simply going to be something that galvanizes and reminds the protagonist with a flat arc, Batman in The Dark Knight, James Bond in Skyfall, of the values and the beliefs that they already had at the beginning. Maybe they'd wavered from, or maybe not, but it reminds them and galvanizes them into championing that in the climax. It just makes their conviction, which was already strong, even stronger. Now we go into the climactic event and sequence, where in a transformative arc, this is going to be the result of them integrating their need revelation in that paying a price phase, right? Because in integrating that need, you are showing us they have actually grown. They've learned the lessons throughout this story now, and their actions here in the climax should reveal, therefore, the theme in action, because it's directly linked to that need revelation they just had. So if they were able to integrate what their need represents and champion that in the climax, typically you're going to gift them with triumph as a result. If, like Ned Stark or Walter White, they refuse to accept what their need represents, they refuse to change their beliefs and behaviors, then because this story arc, this dramatic order arc has happened nonetheless, they're the only thing that has refused to change and adapt with it, and therefore they need to go. They need to meet a tragic end. And therefore we enter the final phase of dramatic order, which is cementing the permanent change which has happened as a result of this arc. This process has permanently changed the characters and the world, and things will never be as they were at the start. So if it's a transformative arc, they're personally changed as well as the world. If it's a flat arc, they haven't really changed, but they have catalyzed that change in the world. And in a flat arc, like a Bond movie, the world kind of resets. Things go back to the status quo, and then the next movie will be the next threat, and so on. So let's go through those stages so you can start planning yours step by step. So the first phase of dramatic order, phase 1 in your story, is the state of being. So you want to introduce your character in their usual routines and current life. You're going to give us the vital context and setup we need to understand their personality and initial conditions. Their actions, outlook, and sense of self is governed by their beliefs, which are influenced by their wound, and you want to establish their core motivations and personal ambition, their internal desire. So do that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, in phase 2, the pursuit of their want. A significant event is now going to disrupt your character's ordinary world, presenting a path to resolving their current discomfort and achieving their want through a specific external goal central to your plot. So what is this event, and how does it offer that specific external goal in a way we can understand them accepting or taking on, because it links to and offers a route to achieving that internal desire. It's going to be the disruption that propels the character into pursuing the want through your story's plot and central conflict. In phase 3, they've now crossed the threshold from their ordinary world into the unfamiliar world of your story. The plot now begins as they enter this story world, where they are going to encounter new and challenging environments and situations, all things that should be unfamiliar to them. And this is where you therefore start to challenge those initial beliefs and introduce them usually to their antagonist head on, whether that's a brief encounter or a major one. And typically this encounter is going to challenge your protagonist with their need, but it's something they're not prepared for and therefore cannot integrate at this point to earn victory. After this, you enter the adaptation phase. So now that your character has encountered what they're up against, how are they going to adapt to the things that have been thrown at them and were all unfamiliar? How are they going to adapt to the initial challenges in the unfamiliar world of your story? Having now encountered what they're up against, they're going to have to begin implementing ideas to overcome the new situation and environment, or the challenges and enemies you've now shown them are also going to lie ahead. They're probably going to come up again, having just encountered them before. In the next phase, now they're going to make progress. They've made those initial adaptations. They've started formulating plans. So your character's actions and adaptations now lead to some external progress. They start achieving specific external goals in pursuit of their plot's specific external goal, which packaged together with the internal desire we understand as their want overall. As their personal competence, their ability increases, and they start getting those wins, you're going to be showcasing their growth to us so far. And now we move into the paying a price phase of the story, where the character pays a significant price for their success so far. It's going to force them, in a transformative arc, to confront their internal wound and accept its effects on their belief and behavior. It catalyzes their revelation about their true need. If they change their belief and behavior at this point by accepting and integrating what their need represents, you are typically going to give them success as a reward in the climax, but refusing to change in transformative arcs results in a tragic fate. So in the climax phase of the story, having now integrated or rejected their need, the character faces their main antagonist or challenged, armed with the lessons learned or rejected from their journey so far. Your central conflict is now resolved through the character's actions and decisions, which should reveal the story's theme in action and showcase the character's commitment to achieving their goal through their ultimate transformation, come what may. Here is where your external arc typically is going to conclude. It's going to be wrapped up through the success or failure to overcome this climactic encounter with their antagonistic force. And the result of that takes us into the change, the resolution phase, or if you're writing TV where there's going to be multiple episodes, it's going to open up the hook for the next episode. But if you're writing a closed novel or a feature film, this is going to be the final phase of the story. And here, the character's journey concludes with them and or their world in a transformed state, depending on the arc. In a flat arc, the world and lives of others have been permanently changed. In a transformative arc, the protagonist themselves is no longer the person they were at the beginning, whether for good or for bad. And here, the internal arc typically concludes. We can now look at dramatic order in action, starting with Inception. In Inception, we have a positive transformative arc, and the theme is absolution. Dom Cobb's initial state of being is that he is an expert at extracting secrets from within dreams, but he's exiled from the USA. His internal desire is to see his children again return home and find internal peace. He is wounded by the guilt and loss of his wife Mal and the manner of her death. This wound traps him in the past, allowing his past as Mal to torment his present. Cobb believes that 1. He is responsible for Mal's death, and that 2. His reality is the true one, something directly challenged by Mal's own belief, a conflict that led to her death, his historic wound, and that wound therefore informs and constantly undermines his belief in reality throughout the story. Cobb's need is to overcome his guilt about his wife Mal's death and make peace with her loss. His want is that he must perform that impossible inception job for Sato, the plot-specific external goal, in order to have the chance of seeing his children again and returning to the USA. The unfamiliar situation that he then enters is returning with Arthur to Paris to plan how to infiltrate Fisher's world and mind, recruiting their team for the heist plot archetype, which is now fully underway. Ariadne is recruited first. The team prepare to enter the dream world, but it's clear that this time, due to the depths they must reach for Inception, things are going to be different. It's all unfamiliar, and the stakes will be new and higher too. Cobb's belief is strained when Mal sabotages their initial training with Ariadne, which challenges Cobb with his wound. But because he's unprepared to face that pain, he can't integrate his need at this point to let Mal go. Ariadne is given a totem as Cobb builds out his team further, adapting to the unfamiliar situation they face, recruiting Eames and Yusuf, and formulating their plan for the heist. They then start making progress. They enter the dream world and immediately face unexpected difficulties and new, higher stakes. If they die in this dream, they won't wake up, and the enemies are prepared for them from the start. Cobb and his team execute their plan and do make it to the target, and they're about to succeed in their mission, but they have to pay that price. Time runs out as the enemies close in on them, and Sato is mortally injured. The target is then shot by Mal as Sato dies, and both enter limbo. Cobb now has to accept that he needs to make peace with his guilt and loss, to absolve himself and release himself of Mal to succeed. And therefore, in the climax, he heads into limbo to seek Sato and honor their agreement, risking being trapped himself. He confronts Mal and his guilt over her death, releasing her, healing himself in doing so, and rescuing Sato as a reward. So he completes this mission, and this climax brings his external arc to a close. And in the final change phase of this film, he is therefore reunited with his children, his internal desire fulfilled as a reward. Having been absolved of his guilt and loss, and therefore his past, the theme is acknowledged as his internal arc closes too. He is no longer trapped in the past and no longer obsesses about his spinning top. He's home in the real world and now has a future. Now we can look at the first series of True Detective. It's a positive, transformative arc. The thematic framing is exploring the nature of a true detective as a means to explore that universal theme, the price of truth. The state of being for both protagonists, Ross Cole and Marty Hart, is that they are detectives, recently partnered and each acting as the other's shadow. Cole is a nihilistic loner. He's wounded by the loss of his daughter. And this has driven him to keep meticulous notes and obsess about answers in pursuit of his internal desire, seeking to understand and order what his wound has made him believe is a chaotic and uncontrollable world in which his actions are ultimately pointless. His initial philosophical point of view is nihilism. Cole needs to confront his personal demons and past traumas to update his belief in the absence of meaning with a more hopeful, connected perspective on life and his personal agency. Martin Hart is a family man struggling with infidelity and work pressure. His wound is guilt and a fractured sense of self. He wrestles with maintaining his facade of control and belief in righteousness, which his actions through his infidelity undermine. So embodying authentic righteousness is Hart's internal desire, and his philosophical point of view is conventionalism. Hart needs to find moral consistency and the courage to face his own flaws to embody the authenticity and righteousness that he admires and espouses. And they begin investigating the bizarre occult murder of Dora Lang in rural Louisiana. Both detectives want to bring the killer to justice, their plot-specific external goal, thinking it's a straightforward case. The case also offers each of them a route to fulfilling their personal internal desires, while the case also confronts them crucially with a philosophy alien to their own. Rust Cole's initial philosophical point of view is nihilism, which is a belief in the meaninglessness and pointlessness of life and our actions. Hart's is conventionalism, the belief in rules and social norms. And they are confronted with an occult murder which leads them into encountering a philosophy which is not aligned with either of their own. And this creates the philosophical conflict which drives character growth throughout the story. But in pursuit of this plot-specific goal, the case, they enter the unfamiliar situation phase of the series, where the stark differences in their personalities is a new situation they each have to internally navigate, while the investigation externally plunges them into a world of occult rituals, corruption, and conspiracy. Their unknowable antagonist seems overwhelming, and the case strains their beliefs, jeopardizing their internal desires. As the case unfolds, both detectives must confront their personal demons, but they're not yet ready to face their wounds, so neither can integrate their need. Cole therefore becomes more isolated and obsessive, while Hart's family life unravels. But in adapting to what they're encountering, they believe they find the perpetrator as the case starts giving some leads. They think it's Reggie Ledoux and his accomplice. Hart kills Ledoux and they close the case, but Cole remains unconvinced, sensing deeper corruption and unresolved questions. But having got some success, a major capture in the case, they have to pay the price. Hart's affairs catch up with him, the fallout destroying the pair's professional relationship too. Cole descends into darkness and alienation, while Hart's family life falls apart. Their careers suffer and they're estranged for years. In 2012, during questioning, Cole reveals he has uncovered a grand conspiracy. So the detectives reunite to uncover the truth, tracking down and confronting the real killer, Errol Childress, whose rival philosophical point of view to Cole's and Hart's is occult constructivism. Childress believes that he can construct meaning and power through mystical ritual and symbolism, using esoteric frameworks to validate his actions and assert his will as the force that shapes his reality. And this is in direct conflict to Rust Cole's nihilism. Cole believed that nothing he does has any point, and his actions are ultimately pointless, and he's confronted with Errol Childress, who believes that his will can shape his reality. This climax now answers the series' framing thematic question, which was established in episode 1 in Hart's opening interview, in which Hart explored the types of men he had known as detective to raise the question of what a true detective's nature is. The series climax now visibly answers that framing question of a true detective's nature as being one willing to go any length for truth and face any darkness, including their own, revealing, therefore, the thematic price of truth in action as Cole literally descends into darkness to fight Errol Childress too. In the end, both men are severely injured but survive, and Cole, previously a staunch nihilist, now experiences a profound philosophical change. Having effected positive change through his actions in the climax, he's dispelled that philosophical belief in nihilism because he overcame a force of evil and chaos and made meaningful change in the world. and therefore he integrates his need as he embraces a more hopeful philosophical outlook on life and his personal agency. Hart, having lost his family but regained his purpose, reflects on his past and the cost of his actions, accepting his flaws, his need. Freed of his personal hypocrisy, Hart can finally embody the integrity that authentic righteousness he aspires to requires. So together, Cole and Hart show us the necessity of courage and integrity, of facing our own demons and hypocrisies if we desire truth and honesty to exist and be championed in the world. Let's now look at Game of Thrones in dramatic order in action in the first novel and the first TV series. It's a negative transformative arc, with Ned Stark as a false protagonist, and the grand narrative theme of the consequences and implications of seeking power is first explored in the Series 1 theme, which is the peril of honor in a world of deceit, which Ned's arc is going to unpack. So Ned's state of being: in the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros, he is the honourable and dutiful Warden of the North, living in relative peace with his family in Winterfell. He is wounded by the unjust circumstances around the death of his sister, and he values justice and loyalty with a strong sense of duty. He believes in honour and honesty. Ned's internal desire is to protect his family and maintain peace and justice in the realm, first demonstrated when he personally executes a deserter of the Night's Watch to show us that internal desire in action so we understand what this guy is about. Ned needs to accept that his ideals of honour and justice cannot survive in a world of backstabbing ambition. He is compelled to uncover the truth behind the death of Jon Arryn, the previous Hand of the King, when King Robert requests Ned to take up the position. This is Ned's central mission, his want, his plot-specific external goal. And this specific external goal is consistent with Ned's internal desire, his drive for justice and maintaining peace. We therefore understand that regardless of the minor or major external goals Ned pursues in this novel or this series, his motivation and core desire never changes, and this consistency means that our, as the reader and audience's investment in Ned and his mission is never jeopardized or confused. The unfamiliar situation phase begins when Ned then travels to King's Landing from the north, entering the treacherous world of court politics. He's confronted with deceit, corruption, and danger, which directly challenge Ned's belief in honour, honesty, and straightforward justice that he values. He has to adapt in King's Landing, and he navigates the political intrigue, uncovering evidence of Queen Cersei's incestuous relationship with her brother Jaime, realising that Cersei's children, including the heir apparent Joffrey, are illegitimate. Ned now makes progress. He gets enough evidence to confront Queen Cersei, hoping to resolve the issue justly by revealing the truth to King Robert. Ned aims to prevent a succession crisis and protect the realm from instability, always consistent with his internal desire. But Ned needed to learn that honesty and honour has no place in a world where deceit and betrayal rule. His refusal to accept this and his adherence to straightforward justice leads him into a perilous confrontation with the Lannisters, and having refused to integrate that need, his climax is therefore tragic. King Robert dies before Ned can reveal the truth, and Ned is betrayed by those he trusted. He is imprisoned in the climax and forced to publicly confess to treason in a desperate attempt to save his daughters. His confession is intended to secure his family's safety and his own exile to the Night's Watch. But his downfall highlights the grand narrative theme, the consequences and implications of seeking power, and through Ned's arc, the first series' primary theme is revealed in action, the peril of honour in a world of deceit. The first series theme therefore firmly establishes the hallmark tone and context, which will be consistent throughout all books and TV series. Ned's refusal to abandon his values and principles leads to the permanent change, the final phase of his story. His quest for honourable justice ultimately leads to his execution. Ned's death plunges the realm into chaos, sparking the War of the Five Kings and catalysing the events for the following novels and TV series. We can also look at another negative transformative arc in Breaking Bad's grand narrative arc across all of the series. The grand narrative theme is the study of change, explored through the corrupting nature of power and control. Walter's initial state of being is as a cowardly high school chemistry teacher who believes that he's a morally good person, but he's wounded by years of professional failures after past successes, resulting in a lack of validation and self-worth. He believes he is powerless and has no control in his life. His internal desire is to provide for his family and validate his life as worthwhile. However, having lived with his wound for so long, he feels that he's a failure and a loser and fears never being more than that. We see him therefore working multiple jobs, which clearly communicate his internal desire to turn that life around. Walter ultimately needs to find the courage to take control of his life if he's to become a man who can provide and get ahead in life. After a shock, terminal cancer diagnosis, and facing financial ruin, Walter's internal desire becomes his urgent obsession. He wants to secure his family's future while he still has time, in the hope that doing so will also provide the validation he craves. So he now attempts this through criminal enterprise, cooking meth, the specific external goal central to the story's conflict and plot, which still clearly serves Walter's internal desire. Walter partners with his former student Jesse and enters the drug world to cook and sell meth, but Walter is out of his depth and surrounded by perils. He rises in the meth business as he adapts to the unfamiliar situation. It's fraught with violence and moral compromise, but he gains a love of the control that comes with his growing dominance and power, and of course he does, because control is the antidote to the powerlessness that defined him in his initial state of being. Powerlessness that emerged from his wound. Walter has a need for control. That's his thematic need, and it has to be because the study of change through the corrupting nature of power and control is the series' core theme. So he starts making progress. He gets rich and becomes feared as Heisenberg, but because this is a tragedy, his successes only reinforce learning the wrong lessons from his wound-informed belief. Walter increasingly believes that the way to achieve his want is by growing his power and control at any cost. But his actions in doing so directly harm his family as he pays the price, the collateral damage, because the more Walter craves and amasses control to satisfy his need, the more he directly jeopardizes his want of securing his family's future as he puts them in increasing danger. And this irreconcilable dynamic is the dramatic engine on which the whole series runs. Walter refuses to accept that his need for control and addiction to power is destroying the lives of everyone around him. And because he refuses to change, his false belief in the primacy of power and control can't be updated, his behavior can't be corrected, and having rejected integrating his need, his arc must therefore be tragic. His empire crumbles as his crimes catch up with him, revealing the theme in action, the study of his change through the corrupting nature of his power and control. He has turned from a meek, law-abiding teacher into a ruthless criminal kingpin, hunted by both the law and criminals for his actions in this transformation. Walter admits this pursuit was ultimately for himself and not his family, and although he acknowledges his true motives and attempts to make amends, having refused to integrate his need to change his belief and behavior before the climax, it's ultimately too late. So the change happens, cementing the permanent resolution when he dies alone, leaving behind a legacy of pain and destruction. We have now established what makes characters and stories captivate, resonate, and endure. If you want to dive into the simple steps for writing impactful, effective settings, then click right here. And if you want to master storytelling and professional writing faster and easier than you ever have before, you should check out the Pro Writer Blueprint course.